Tuesdays, for me, are deadlift day. It's a relatively simple exercise. You take a bar, you put a bunch of weight on it, and you do one of those with it. But as the weight increases, your blood pressure spikes as you straighten out, and a lot of times it feels as though you're going to pass out. Sometimes as I do it, it tears off bits of skin from my hands. And for a while, after every time I do it, my thumbs would just go numb for a little while. But I try not to think about that. I try and also not think about the fact that if I mess it up even once, I could have back pain the rest of my life. And so there's always this moment on Tuesdays as I approach the bar that I kind of ask myself, do I really want to do this? And all of us will find ourselves in that position, even if you never come and lift weights with me. You'll find yourself in a difficult spot in life. You're going to have kids who don't sleep, a job that you hate, or following Jesus will have you feeling like you're dying. And you're going to ask yourself, do I really want to do this? Why am I doing this? The passage today is going to look at our motivation as Christians. We're continuing, this is the third part in the series on the book of 1 Thessalonians, if you want to turn there or follow along with us. If you missed either of the past 2 previous weeks, you can always go on our Facebook page and find links to the sermons there. We're going to start today in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. This is a letter written to a church from 3 people, again, Paul, Silas, and Timothy. They've let the church know how proud they were of God's work through the gospel, the change that it brought in them. And now they mention their reasons for coming to them. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1. For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you is not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. So he says, hey, look, before we came to you, and you guys know this, before we came to you, we went through a really rough time at Philippi. You'll find the story of that in Acts chapter 16. Basically what happens is Paul is there in the city of Philippi, and they cast a demon out of a young girl. And this really upset some people. Remember last week we talked about how the gospel provokes conflict because people had been using her to tell fortunes as part of her affliction, and so they just destroyed their business model. And so they grab them and they bring them, Paul and Silas, before the city leaders. And they complained against them, and then they said, you know what, let's beat them up. That will fix our problem. And so in Acts chapter 16, here's what happens. The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates tore the garments off them and gave orders to beat them with rods. They're like, hey guys, let's grab some sticks. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. And when they inflicted many blows upon them, they threw them into prison, ordering the jailer to keep them safely. Having received this order, he put them into the inner prison and fastened their feet into the stocks. I encourage you to read the rest of Acts chapter 16 on your own time. Incredible their response, and God delivers them in amazing fashion. But Paul and Silas, their response to this is they spend the night singing hymns of praise to God. That is how they dealt with it. I want you to consider if this had happened to you. Let's say you have a conversation with your neighbor about Jesus, and this horribly offends them. And so they drag you down to the city hall, and they tear your clothes off right there on Walnut Street, and beat you with sticks. And then you end up, they drag you down the hill and throw you in the jail, and you got 2 black eyes and a cracked rib, and you're handcuffed to the wall. Are you going to spend the night singing, how great is our God? And then once released, would you then go and talk to the neighbor on the other side of your house? Honestly. And yet that is what they did. So they endured this at Philippi, and they said, well, let's continue on. Again, he says, we had boldness in our God. Boldness. We didn't slink into town and say, hey, that went really poorly for us last time. Let's do things under the radar here. No, he said, we came into you with boldness. to declare to you the gospel of God in the middle of conflict. For our appeal does not spring from, and he goes on to give a long list of things that did and did not motivate them. Because there comes a point when, like I said, you reevaluate your life decisions. For the apostles, they experienced this in town after town after town. And they're writing to their friends, right? Especially that original group of then 11 and then 10 and then 7 as they're getting killed one by one. And they're asking themselves, wait, why are we doing this? And Paul and Silas, they had trouble before they arrived at Thessalonica, while they were in Thessalonica, and after they left the town. Trouble after trouble after trouble. Paul was shipwrecked 3 times. You gotta think at some point, he's just gonna consider riding a bike right to the next town, or walking, or something. I wouldn't get on the ship with him. And yet, you will face times like this following Jesus. Remember that boldly speaking the gospel in the middle of conflict is not just what these guys did. It's what all of us are called to do. We live differently. We speak boldly and we suffer joyfully. And the church that he's writing to, they were doing this. They were suffering. They were sharing the gospel. They were doing it with joy. And so he says, look guys, I want you to know what motivates us. I want you to know why it is that we keep pressing on town after town after town. And there's also a sense that these questions, these false motivations, he goes on to list, that these are questions outsiders are asking. So people who watch them have these questions, why do you guys keep on doing this? And so it's not just to encourage the church, it's to say, hey, other people are going to ask you why it is that you do what you do. When it comes to spiritual things, there are so many people out there with corrupt motives. There's so many fakes and imposters out there that sometimes people get really cynical, and I understand why. In fact, one of the first things I deal with when I share the gospel with people, when I talk to people who aren't in the church, the number one thing I have to deal with is, let's talk about the people you've known that were spiritual imposters. The people that hurt you, that mistreated you, that abused you, that also wore the label of faith, and let's deal with that first and foremost. Many of you, that was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome before walking in the doors of the church. Of course, it's not just in spiritual things. I remember, reading about this article, this guy passed himself off as a doctor and had some woman come to him and injected actual cement into her posterior, I guess to give it that fuller, really solid look. And then of course they're prosecuting him. Now does that mean, let me ask you church, does that mean that all doctors are fakes and frauds and just want to inject cement into you? No! But you have to understand, there are people like that out there. Okay? And so our job is to differentiate. To say, yes, there are people like that. It's crazy. There are people like out doing that stuff out there, but we're not them. And so when we talk to people, especially outside of the church, we have to acknowledge, look, there are people with corrupt motives, but that's not us. And the difference begins with living a life of integrity. 1 Peter 2:12 says this, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when, not if, when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Let me tell you, as a Christian, you will endure suspicion from people. If you start living boldly, especially if you keep it shut up in a closet, never talk about it, people will treat you as one of them. But if you begin to boldly speak about Jesus, instantly it will arouse suspicion in the people around you. They will speak of you as an evil person. It will happen, I promise you. Let your life prove them wrong first. You should live such a life, right, that should your house be raided and your cell phone seized, right, the only thing they would walk away with is confirmation, like, wow, that dude really does love Jesus. Right? Every corner of your life should bear witness to that. It should never be an inconsistent thing that somebody hears the way you talk and then they get to know you in their life and find a disconnect. That is the best thing that we can do to combat suspicion that people feel towards Christians and people in the church. And by the way, that doesn't mean that when he says live honorably, that doesn't mean that you have to live perfectly. Remember, the witness of a Christian is that I'm loved by grace in a way I don't deserve. Yes, I'm flawed, I fall short of God's glory, and I'm trying my best, but I live in His grace. That is your witness. I've known many people, the Christians, and worked for many of them, that looked at me instantly with suspicion because I followed Jesus. And kind of what happened, my one boss, he was making leather belts, he was an atheist, and he had been swindled by the last Christian who worked for him. And so then I show up, and he looks at me immediately the same way. But as I worked for him, and he observed my conduct, and I set out with the intent, I want to be the best worker he's ever had. I don't want to leave here and give him any reason for slandering the name of Jesus because I left anything lacking in my conduct at work. And what happened is, as I worked for him, it really messed with his head. And he kind of went through like a series of trying to understand what he was seeing, because I didn't fit into any of the molds he was used to thinking about religious people in. We should confuse people. And we should also be ready to explain these things. And that's what Paul does here in chapter 2. And so here's the list, and we're just going to kind of go through these one by one real quick. For our appeal, our motivation, the reason we're doing this, does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. For he never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed, God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. So let's just go through that. The first thing he says is, look, we did not speak to you from error. This wasn't the result of some massive mistake. And for many people, that is the first thing they leap to, especially those who don't believe in God at all, right? They may allow that we are sincere. Okay, maybe you do really believe what you believe, but they look at us like that guy who recently launched himself off in a rocket up into the atmosphere because he believed the earth to be flat. There are people they seriously believe this. And this guy was like, I don't know what he was going for with the rocket launch, but he's like, I just want to show you guys, I really believe this. And he launched himself off, and everybody's like, what? I guess he does really believe that. He's tragically wrong, but I guess he's sincere. And for a lot of people, that's the way they look at Christians. They're like, okay, maybe you are sincere, but you're wrong. And so Paul tells them, look, we're not mistaken in this. And again, in 2 Peter, and this is the consistent, all the apostles keep talking about this. It says, for we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. But we were eyewitnesses of His majesty. The apostles said, look, we're not taking, this isn't like some rumor we saw on Facebook, right? We're not telling you about Jesus because somebody told my cousin who mentioned it to me the other day. He said, we were eyewitnesses. John, in his letter, he says, look, these are things that we have seen with our eyes and touched with our hands. That's what we're telling you about. We're not mistaken. We call them liars. But if you understand those things, they claim to see them. And what that means for us as well, as Christians, we should have a thoughtful faith. A faith that is carefully reasoned, so that if somebody asks me, why do you believe this? How do you know you're not mistaken? How do you know that everything you believe just isn't true? It's like the guy who believes the earth is flat. So we can come back to that and say, well, here's why. I've given careful thought to this. And I'll just say, this is a hobby of mine. I love it when somebody asks me that question. I love it. Because these are things that I've carefully considered. And so we should be prepared to be able to explain to somebody. You see, it's not a mistake. I can be confident that the things that I believe are true. I've considered the alternatives and I found them utterly lacking. He goes on, he says, we didn't speak to you from error, and our appeal doesn't spring from impurity. This word means basically something that is unclean, used generally to describe sexual misconduct. I was in Michigan, and we were at this park with my grandmother, and I saw a picture on a Ferris wheel. It was really bizarre. These guys with epic beards playing baseball. And I sat there looking at it, and Christine was going around and around the Ferris wheel, and I ended up looking them up. And it turns out it was a religious cult that had been started in that area that I guess believed, among other things, in beards and baseball. And as soon as I read that it was a religious cult, I knew that I knew the shape of the story, even before I read anything else. And it was true. Because so many cults, they follow the same pattern. There was a charismatic guy who started a movement. He gave followers and influence and power and position, and he used that to exploit them in sexual terms. Time after time after time after time. If you ever study the founding of religious cults, this is a pattern that repeats over and over. You see it in Mormonism with Joseph Smith, who is like, hey, God wants you to give me your wife. You see it in Islam, where Muhammad is like, yeah, God told me I could marry this 7-year-old. You see it with so many cults that when people are put in positions of power, they exploit in sexual terms the people underneath them. And Paul says, we are different. Jesus was not married. Paul was single and says that he celebrated the celibate life. Do you know how crazy that is in our culture today for him to write like, yes, I'm single, and yes, sex is a beautiful thing that God has given to marriage, but I'm single and that's okay, and that's God's intent for me, and I can live a full and meaningful life like this. So he says, look, he writes to his church, he says, look, I didn't come to you with this in mind. So I didn't speak from error, not from impurity. Christians have always stood out in every culture, in every age, when it comes to sexuality and our dealing with it. And then he goes, or any attempt to deceive. So for those people who understood, okay, the disciples, you're saying, not just that like you heard from somebody else that Jesus died and then rose again, you're claiming you've actually seen him. Okay, you're a liar. Like that was the next thing that people jumped to with the disciples. Have you ever been around a compulsive liar? I used to work with one, and it was at first aggravating and then amusing, because I began to see it as a game, because I knew he would compulsively lie to make himself appear better about any topic that was brought up. And so I would just throw stuff out there to see like what he would come up with, like, oh yeah, did you watch a football game? And wow, it turns out he was headed to the NFL, but a tragic knee injury, kept him out of the league. And then I mentioned, oh yeah, I saw the Hope Diamond, and as it turns out, his family had donated all of the gems in the exhibit. It was just crazy, the stuff he would make up. You ever notice how people who are compulsive liars like that, they never make up lies that make them look bad, right? They never tell you, the fish was this small. Oh man, you missed it. After you left, I caught this huge branch, right? Or hey, it turns out like, my great uncle killed JFK, isn't that true? Nobody makes up stuff like that. And so when we look at the Gospels, what's so refreshing is that the disciples, either they write themselves or they work with people who write the Gospels. And you know what the Gospels tell us? How much the disciples were terrible followers of Jesus. Like over and over again. They didn't believe him. They argued over who gets to sit where and which of us is going to be the greatest. Peter tells Jesus to his face, yeah, you're wrong, multiple times. And so, if you're looking for like any attempt to deceive, the Gospels do not reflect that. And I would say for us as Christians as well, do you know what reassures people that we're not trying to lie to them? When you're willing to say, I don't know. It's not going to kill you. Right? There are many times when somebody asks me a question or like, they look at me like, you need to explain God's actions in this. And I don't know. Or when we're willing to honestly talk about dark chapters in church history, dark chapters in our own lives, our own flaws and mistakes. It is okay to say, and because what that reassures people is like, I'm not trying to lie to you. Let me tell you today, Jesus does not need you to be his PR spokesperson who tries to spin everything in his favor, right? These people who tell the truth do so boldly. It says, we didn't come to you with any attempt to deceive. We'll skip that middle part and get to the end about being approved by God. But he says, we never came to you with words of flattery. As you know what I love about buying a car? I love interacting with salespeople because they have to laugh at your jokes. You ever notice that? Like, you're dealing with somebody who's trying to sell you something, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, you're like so interesting and funny, and and you can try this. Do this, like, go and start dropping puns on them and see if they'll laugh at them because nobody thinks those are funny. Sorry, Sarah. And they do that because, they're trying to get something out of you. And so you tell somebody they're amazing and funny and charming, and your kids are so cute. And you do that, and what that does is while you're nodding along, like, yeah, I am like that. They're pulling your wallet out of your back pocket. That's how flattery works. The gospel is like the opposite of that, right? Because they come into town and they're not saying, oh, hey, you church, you guys are so great and you're totally good on you. He says, no, you guys are worse than you've ever dared yourself to believe. Like, that is your status before God. And yet you are loved more than you think possible. That is like the opposite of flattery. And you look at his letters. When they write letters to the churches, some of them, like Philippians, is nearly entirely positive. But very frequently, they're dealing quite bluntly with the church's problems. So they're not trying to butter people up to get something out of them. And when we talk to people, it's crazy to me. Like, sometimes I've had conversations, with someone where I need to tell you something you do not want to hear. I don't look forward to that stuff. I really don't. But it's amazing because sometimes people's response to that, sometimes it's hostility and anger, but sometimes it's like, okay. I've had people thank me for it because they recognize honesty. And again, Christians, our culture is desperate for people who will speak the truth in love. Because you can tell when somebody's being fake. Don't be like that in front of people. We come to you and we didn't flatter you. And we didn't come into you with a pretext for greed. Oh, I understand where this one comes from. Sat across the table with a guy and he told me, he said, they just want my money. He said, I went to that church. The way they talked about giving, I've never been back. And what's interesting is he's saying this to me, and he runs a business. His life involves the handling of money, selling people stuff, having other people sell him stuff, and yet when he ran into that salesman attitude in the church, it was so horrifying to him that he never went back. So I understand. Many people, I felt that way, about pastors, like, why should I be giving them my money? 2 Corinthians 2:17, Paul writes to the church, we are not like so many. And again, he acknowledges, like, look, there are people out there. And for them, it wasn't just like people in the church. There are all kinds of philosophers and speakers that would come to you and say, I will teach you enlightenment for a price. Here's my beginning rate. And he says, we are not peddlers of God's word. The gospel that we bring to you, it is not a product that we are selling to make money. I'm not trying to sell you all a DVD after this. There are people that do that. Absolutely are. I've heard of churches that have people bring in their W-2s just so they can check up on them. I've heard of a church that sent a woman a bill. Said, hey, you've missed a few Sundays and we've estimated the difference between your giving and 10%, so here's a bill of the difference. That's crazy. Absolutely crazy. There are people that do that. Not us. That tiny fraction of the person, they get all the attention because they're the ones, right, that are buying those TV slots and telling you that God will give you a new car if you help them put new helicopter blades on their ride to work. But the vast majority of pastors are the ones with their heads down doing God's work and not getting all the press coverage. Now, I usually point out to people who are suspicious that on the whole, pastors, you look at the statistics, make far less than anybody else in any other field compared to their college degree. In churches with integrity, I thought it was cute. I saw a little while ago, like I forget which store it was, but they're like, oh, we are being radically open with how much our managers make all the way on down to people stocking the shelves open as a grocery company. I was like, that's cute. You realize the church has been doing that for centuries, right? That any church, if they're open with their finances, and if you ever move somewhere else, you need to look for this. A church that says, here is how much we spend on everything we do. Here is how much our staff is paid. And it's something that the people agree on. Because we're not here to sell you stuff for profit. The pastor, generally in churches, isn't even in the room when leadership discusses what they're paid. And even if somebody were to come in here and give us a big old bag of money, we would spend it not buying me a jacuzzi or like a church Lamborghini. We'd spend it doing God's work. And he says, God is witness. And it's like this shot across the bow for anybody that would ever go in and attempt to use the name of Jesus to increase their own financial standing. He says, God will be a witness of your activities. It's not going to be that you're going to be dragged before Congress one day, as some people have been, but you're going to stand before God and give an answer. And it goes on, he says, we didn't seek glory from people. Now, earlier he said, we're not speaking to please men. Please God. We're not doing this to be popular. Or to have like power and influence over people. I know like some people, that's the perception, especially of like pastors, right? Well, they just want to be like well respected. And that baffles me. Because who goes into ministry thinking that's going to make a bunch of people happy with them? I'll be honest with you. It's crazy. Like I had a pastor friend, right? And he's in this church, and somebody got mad at him, and so they went in every single day. They sat in the parking lot with a notebook, and they wrote down the time that he arrived at the church and the time that he left, just to check up on him. Pastoring is a crazy thing to go into if you want people to be happy with you. And I'll say ministry of any kind of service is crazy to go into thinking of the respect and recognition it might get you from other people. I mean, we do our best, and let me tell you, we appreciate the people that serve in the church, and we do our best to consistently do that. But that's not your motivation. You know, it can't be our motivation as a church If our motivation as a church is to make people happy, that will lead to horrible stuff. Because you know what makes people happy? Fidget spinners. Well, like a year ago, right? Like a year ago, peak. Can you imagine if a church said, "Oh, we got to make people happy"? You know what makes the young people fidget spinners? We totally redesign the church, right? And we're gonna take down the steeple, we build a fidget spinner up there, and come into the fidget. And you know how stupid they would look today? Because that is how fleeting what it is that pleases people. And if you live your life for the approval of others, you'll constantly be doing this. I was even hesitant about redoing the stage like this. We did it because it was cheap, all right? We got trash wood for free. Because I understand that right now, I'll be honest with you, we're at peak wood palette. We are. All right, Chip and Joanna Gates, everything they're doing in about 15, 20 years will look horribly dated. And so I just want you to understand, we did this thing, but we are going to have to redo it. At some point, probably. Because that's the way people's desires work. So you have to understand, if you live your life for the glory, the recognition, or to please other people, you will always be spinning your wheels. And go back to where he says, and he even says, look, we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. Paul, he occupied a special role in God's ministry. He planted more churches and just led to this explosion of the gospel in the Gentile world that eventually brought the Roman Empire down. And God had given him special revelations, but he says, look, I didn't come to you saying, hey, look at me, I'm somebody. He didn't come to you. He said, I didn't come to you insisting on some kind of title for myself. So look, no matter what you do for God, even if you could claim anything of yourself, never seek glory from other people. He goes on and he says, and I love this description of what did not fit. It says, as we have been approved by God. He's not looking for that from anybody else. I don't care what your mama thinks of you. I don't care if you get official recognition, some certificate, whatever else that people might recognize in you. God's approval trumps everything. You want to be happy in your life, dwell on the fact that it is God who has approved you. Other people may reject you. But everything that we do begins, our work for Him draws from this. And it's not that if I do this or do that, I will be approved by God. Like I'm working in order to earn His approval or gain more approval than I already have. I has accepted me. Past tense, I have been approved by God. That is what everything draws from. Don't ever fall into that trap thinking that some better future version of yourself would be more pleasing to God. And that's what love is. God loved you at your worst. There's nothing you could possibly do in your life to earn more approval from Him than you have right now if you're in Christ. It is because we have been loved by Him that we live and do everything that we do. There's not just approval in general that He's talking about. It's that I've been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. It says God has given me His approval, and that begins at salvation, but He's also given me a sacred task to do. Like when I give somebody my baby, you parents, you know what that's like. You hand your kid off into somebody else's arms. Right? For a date night or something like that, or it's just the mailman and you need to get a shower and you're like, here! I'll be back in 5 minutes. I haven't showered in days. What an incredible thing is, you've approved somebody, and I'll tell you, it is a small number, right? Parents, it's a small number of people that you will trust with your kids. Some of you are like, just find a home. And if you can't, come home after you've eaten. Okay, think back to when you were a new parent, right? You approve somebody, you trust them with your kid, and you place that burden on them, and you expect not to come home to find the kid, half naked in the front yard while they're inside streaming Netflix, right?
Well, you have a fence for it.
Yes, that's why you have a fence. And so he says, look, God has approved us and entrusted us with something far more precious than even Mitchell. He's given us the gospel. See, God's not the one out there. I mean, the Holy Spirit works and He does all the heavy lifting, but He's given us the responsibility of going. He's given you the responsibility of telling your neighbors about Him. That is your job. And it's a sacred task that you've been given. He says that's what motivates us. I want, and He says, to please God, not people. We speak to please God. Every decision I make needs to begin on that ground. What would be most pleasing to God? I don't care if it's my hairstyle, where I go to college, or the job decisions I make. The beginning point for all of those questions and everything I do in my life needs to be grounded in the fact that I've been approved by God and I live to fill Him with joy. And it's the difference you can watch when Christine dances when we are watching her. She doesn't dance because she thinks we won't love her unless she does. Oh, she did this amazing magic trick for us. She came into me and she had a lumpy hat on. And she said, "Hey, Daddy, watch this. Do you see anything in my hands?" And she turns around and pulls a black out of the hat and turns around and goes, "Ta-da!" And what do you clap? That's amazing. And she does that because of our joy. And you can watch a child's face brighten up when they experience the joy of their parents. And so that's how you live your life. When things get tough, when it feels like you're dying, when you feel like you just got beat up yesterday, you're getting beat up today, and it's going to happen tomorrow, it's because I've been approved by God. And I live my life to please Him. That will carry you through anything, I promise you. And sometimes I have felt as though that's all I've got left. I just want to please God. It also says, we speak to please God who tests our hearts. And I pray that you would do that with you this morning. Sometimes it's worth sitting down and asking God to examine us and examine our motives and say, God, and it's a scary question that God revealed to me any areas in my heart, any times that I've done things for the wrong reasons. I invite you to do that this morning. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your love and your grace for us unmerited. I pray that even as you reveal to us, sometimes that we do things for the wrong reason because we're trying to make other people happy or serving our own interests. That you would always bring us back to that root that nourishes everything that we do, that we have been loved by God, forgiven by God, and that we work in and through your joy and your power. So God, when you bring us to that point when we are questioning everything and asking ourselves, why